Hello, I'm Ben Wattenberg. A decade ago, New York City was full of bad news. Its crime rate was high and its budget out of control. The middle class wasn't walking to the suburbs, it was running. Today, New York City seems full of good news, and Mayor Rudolph Giuliani and his team, surprise, are claiming credit. We are here today at the Cooper Union for the advancement of science and art in New York City. This building stands at the edge of what was once the worst neighborhood in New York, the legendary Skid Row. Are today's reforms hype, or are they the real thing? And are there lessons here in New York for other cities? Joining us in Cooper Union's Great Hall to sort through the conflict and the consensus are Fred Siegel, history professor at the Cooper Union and author of The Forthcoming Fall from Grace, New York, Washington, Los Angeles, and the Failure of Urban Liberalism. Esther Fuchs, director of the Barnard-Columbia Center for Urban Policy and author of Meyers and Money, Fiscal Policy in New York and Chicago. Michael Meyers, executive director of the New York Civil Rights Coalition and adjunct professor at Mercy College. And Jim Sleeper, member of the editorial board of the journal Dissent and author of The Closest of Strangers, Liberalism and the Politics of Race in New York. The topic before this house, New York, New York, and the future of American cities. The first of two programs this week on Think Tank.
Last thing I do in this city, I want to get rid of all these old law tenement houses.
It was Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia, known to many New Yorkers as the Little Flower, who made it his mission to clean up Skid Row. New York's current mayor, Rudolph Giuliani, calls LaGuardia his role model, declaring that he too will clean up New York. Giuliani says his efforts are already paying off. Crime is down 30%, and that includes murders and rapes, as well as panhandling and turnstile jumping. The city is cleaner. Times Square, once a national symbol of seedy urban decadence, is enjoying a renaissance. But not all New Yorkers are rejoicing in Rudy's reforms. Some citizens charge that the lower crime rates are a national trend and not tied to one set of local policies. The case is also made that while New York's middle and upper classes are doing better, its poor are doing worse. New York has always been a melting pot. Since the 1980s, immigration has risen steadily. That predates the Giuliani administration. Some observers credit immigrants with reviving the city's economy. They say that without immigrants, New York would still be losing residents. All of which raises the question, is the Big Apple so big, so diverse, so unique that other cities cannot learn from it? Or, to paraphrase Frank Sinatra, if you can do it here, can you do it anywhere? All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us. I want to go around the room once, starting with you, Jim Sleeper, and I want to read a quote from Mayor Rudolph Giuliani about midway into his term, where he said, quotes, "The biggest and largest special interest group in the city is the intellectual establishment. New York is a great intellectual center that has become unwilling to think a new thought." What does that mean?
A canard that will not bear scrutiny. No, I think if he means by intellectual center, if he's lumping in the journalism world, the media and entertainment world, people who chatter for a living, and not talking about scholarship, there's a sense in which that's true. But I think the biggest constituency in the city...
In what sense is it true?
Well, I was about to say, I think there's an advocacy community and a social comment community that's big because the real big constituency, New York has the highest proportion of any city, I think, of its residents who work for the public sector in one way or another, or who need the public sector in ways. And that has generated a community of interpreters, advocates, and commentators that is very big. That's part of it.
Okay, Esther Fuchs?
seems to me almost a kind of irrelevancy to what are the real issues in New York right now. I mean, sure, we're a city with a lot of people with college degrees. I mean, people still come to New York if they want to be the best and make the greatest contribution to whatever profession they're in. But to suggest that intellectuals somehow don't think a new thought is, you know, it's sort of reminiscent of Spiro Agnew type criticisms, so that you think you can somehow get a populist vote by hitting the elite intellectuals.
They also said that Dan Quayle was wrong. Fred Siegel,
New York
are New York brainy people brain dead? That's the real question.
Clearly, we've suffered from an intellectual hardening of the arteries for a half century. Most of the political class in New York still thinks the New Deal is in the vanguard of social policy and that New York is in the vanguard of the New Deal. We've been bypassed on a whole number of fronts. And one correction, Ben, you talked at the beginning of the opening as if New York's economy had revived. It most certainly has not. The one thing Giuliani cannot take credit for, and there's a great deal for which he can take credit for, is reviving the economy. We lost 330,000 jobs in the last recession. We've gained back barely a tenth.
All right, we will come back to that. Michael Myers.
I don't understand Giuliani's quote, since a lot of the new ideas he's gotten from the Manhattan Institute and other academic think tanks and borrowed from Philadelphia and other intellectual centers. New York is an intellectual center, and Giuliani is borrowing new ideas and trying to get new innovative approaches to old problems. Now, I think that New York remains an intellectual beachhead, but look, new ideas, old ideas, the problems remain the same unless we put creative, energetic, competent people at the helm in terms of solving them.
All right, now, Fred, your book, your forthcoming book, is entitled something about the failure of urban liberalism. Is that what you were talking about before? And you teach here at Cooper Union. This was the avant-garde social policy school in New York, and one of the great ones in the nation. I mean,
For a century.
Are all your colleagues in a time warp?
Mostly, yes.
Where are you teaching next year?
He has tenure, that's why you could say that. Are you kidding?
That's an old idea.
And he's not giving it up.
That's right. Well, I mean, you're saying, yes, it's a feisty place full of new ideas, and you're saying it's...
Look, it's not as if the Giuliani administration hasn't introduced some new ideas, but most of them haven't been accepted. For instance, we had a tiny cut in the hotel tax, and there are many people, many commentators, political columnists, politicians in the city who talk as if we've had some kind of Reaganite revolution in New York City. A tiny cut. We are still the most heavily taxed municipality in the United States. Giuliani has barely dented the structure of programs put in place first by the New Deal and then by the Great Society. He's trimmed a little bit of the fat along the edges. There's been no genuine transformation of the city, unfortunately.
I think you could make a case that he has done one thing that does have application perhaps to other cities as well. Leaving aside the root causes in terms of the intellectuals or some of the structural issues, he has done some things that have changed the climate of the city in ways that are palpable. On racial theater and on crime, the quality of life kinds of things, which all of us, I think many of us were skeptical of, some people scoffed at. He really showed.
No, I wrote his speeches on the subject.
All right, okay. I didn't say all of us, and I wrote the column saying that he should do it, right? But what he showed in a lot of ways, for example, the kind of broken window theory of crime, that if you go after some of the little things, the surface things, the disturbances on the street that seem minor.
This is the James Q. Wilson idea.
Yes, James Q. Wilson.
Will somebody explain it?
If liberals will say, or many people, the intellectual people that Giuliani is railing about will say, if you want to get to the roots of crime, you've got to address the structural and other problems that lead to unemployment,
jobs, education,
racism, and so on. All true. I actually agree with that. And yet, what I think he has shown us, and what I think every city can learn from this, there is a lot of headway you could make in the meantime, even if you are failing to address some of those things, as I agree he did. When you attack some of those surface things, there's a lot of give in people. There is a different climate. There is a different sense of what the possibilities are that come from enforcing certain things.
Let's deal with that one for a minute. I mean, there are sort of two schools of thought on that, which is crime has gone down everywhere. Anyway, I would say in large measure because there are more people in the slammer. There are a lot of other reasons for that. And then there are people who say, yeah, but New York went down way more than
certainly
anyone else.
did.
Something like, what, half of the increase of national crime.
I'll give you an
So
example.
now, is this attributable to Mayor Giuliani and Commissioner Bratton? Is that was
Yes.
You know what, we have to put this in perspective. I think we would actually all agree here that this administration deserves credit for reducing the crime rate. It's not just him alone. I mean, this is a sort of problem that this mayor has, taking credit for the Times Square redevelopment project, for example, that's been going on for 15 years.
If
The crime is the
hold
same
on,
thing.
hold on. If Mayor Dinkins had been mayor for these last, 3.5 years, do you think that crime rate would have gone down as rapidly?
I don't know
And
about
that
as
requires-
rapidly, but it certainly would have gone down, because the most important, most people in the crime field will acknowledge, the key to the reduction of the crime rate in New York was the increase in the number of police that was done in the Dinkins administration through a program called
disagree.
Safe Streets, Safe
it was
Cities.
how those police were
Wait a
deployed,
second,
Esther.
3,000 extra cops on the street. Now,
It was how they were deployed.
Yes, but if they weren't there to be deployed, you wouldn't have been able to create any
But they
program.
could have been there and you would have done
No,
nothing.
they couldn't have, because Dinkins went to Albany, to the state legislature, and he put his head on the chopping block, essentially, and said, I want a tax increase. You put this surcharge on income tax, and I will guarantee that this money will go to the police department. He went, he lobbied Albany, he got that program passed, and he increased the number of cops in the city. The crime rate
And increased
was-
taxes.
And increased taxes, but people accepted it because it was related to the
do it
cops.
because he wanted to do it.
Oh,
we all
please,
know
he
the
didn't
history
do
of
it
how he
because
did
he
it. We
wanted
know
to do it.
the headlines,
Speak to the
Dave, do
man.
something, were
Speak
quite
to the
memorable,
man.
Esther.
Well,
I was
he
there.
went and he
I was
did
there.
it. He went to Albany.
He was the hapless guy
got-
who had no
excuse
choice
me.
but to do what
Oh,
he was
please,
pressured
no
to
choice.
do.
Well, people have
And
no
then he
choice
would not
all
have
the
known.
time.
He wouldn't have known
They
how to
have no
deploy those
choice
cops.
Hang on,
all
hey,
the
listen,
time.
hold
Well,
on.
then why did
Esther,
the crime
you've got to
rate
face
decline
reality.
during the Dinkins
You've got to
Nobody-
face
nobody-
reality.
Why did crime decline during
hello,
the Dinkins
hold on,
administration?
hold on,
You
hold on.
remember how
Tell
you
me
began.
why.
Remember how you
Why?
began your
Well,
talk.
you're not
You've
answering my
forgotten how you
question.
began.
Hang
You've
on,
forgotten how
hang
you
on,
began.
look.
I remember how
Wait,
I-
hold on one second, and I'll tell you why to hold on. Because not only can't I understand what you're saying, none of our viewers can hear what you're saying. Now, I want to go back to this
Okay.
issue. I'm going to give you 30 seconds to make your point,
enough.
and I'm going to give you 30 seconds to make your point, and then I'm going to go to Fred, who's dying here. Go ahead.
Okay. The point being is that in order to reduce the crime in New York, it was imperative to increase the number of police in the city, which had declined from the 1975 fiscal crisis. Everybody acknowledged this. David Dinkins was the mayor that went to Albany to get the legislation passed, Safe Streets, Safe Cities, which increased the number of cops by 3,000 in the city of New York. Crime was declining for 3 years out of the 4 years of the Dinkins administration. So this is a critical piece. I'm not saying that Giuliani did not take this and then transform it and do good with it.
Okay.
He did.
Fair enough.
We've all agreed that crime was dropping nationwide as well as here. And to simply say that because it happened on Dinkins' watches or on Giuliani's watch is not enough. If we want to look at the discrepancy between the sharp drop that's taken place recently, we do have to look at the way the police were deployed and used. For that, Giuliani gets a lot.
Giuliani and Commissioner Bratton.
Let me try to reconcile the
The
two views.
3,000 cops on
When
board.
Dinkins got the money and it was poured into the hands of our police chief then, out-of-town Lee Brown, nothing happened.
Is that what he was called?
That's what he was called. He was always out of town.
He is now the drug czar.
He was the drug czar.
was the drug
He was
czar, right.
unsuccessful there as he was in his previous jobs. And he's one of these guys who fails to higher and higher levels. The other person who deserves enormous credit for this, but liberals in New York won't give it to him, because he won't admit it himself because he is a liberal, is Mario Cuomo. Mario Cuomo built prison space like crazy. But he could never say this. He could never turn to the public and say, I'm Mario Cuomo, I'm helping reduce crime by building all these prisons, because he would have outraged his liberal constituency.
I think credit can be spread liberally, if I can use that word.
Don't.
You can give Mayor Dinkins credit. You can give credit to Mayor Giuliani. You can certainly give credit to Commissioner Bratton. But I think we should also give credit to the rank and file of the police force and to the New Yorkers, the people who refuse to give up.
I want to move the topic forward for a moment here. You made, for a man who I have always admired as a great realist, you made the statement that Giuliani hasn't solved the jobs problem, or he hasn't made progress in jobs.
Right.
Do you believe in this sort of Neanderthal economics that mayors and governors and presidents create jobs? Is that what you're trying to say?
No.
You still believe that stuff?
No, not at all. No. Giuliani promised to do.
what was he supposed to do? What is a
agree
mayor?
with you. No, I agree with you. I'm not fault. He said he came in promising to do three things. He said, I'm going to do crime, jobs, and schools. So far, he's 1 for 3, and I totally agree that you cannot expect mayors to do very much given the structural crunch that cities are in right now. It's just very hard for anything a mayor can do other than the basic municipal functions that make a city attractive or not. The problem Giuliani faces is a little unusual, though, because we have such a high proportion of New Yorkers whose income comes from tax dollars. Not because they're necessarily on welfare, but because they work for the public sector. So they're not producing tax dollars, they're
Has he
consuming.
made headway on schools?
Well, let me take a stab at schools for a minute. I think the irony of the schools situation is that this mayor did, when he started, focus directly on a huge structural problem that we have. We have a Board of Education that's archaic, that many of us are on record as saying should have been blown up. My view is should have been blown up and just saved the payroll department and nobody would miss it. New York and other cities which are captured by teachers' unions have a very big problem, which is they're stuck with there are a lot of terrific teachers out there. I don't want to get this rap for not thinking, and I've met them and they're great, but they suffer because the union protects the crummy teachers who should not be in the system anymore, and many schools are stuck with these crummy teachers, and also they're stuck having to deal with the entire population. They cannot cream the I'm tired of this Catholic school example. You can throw kids out of, I went to parochial school, for God's sake. You pay, and what happens is you can throw them out when they don't behave.
Fred has something he wants to say about jobs, I know, the economy, and then there's another question that I want to ask about New York, and then we're going to move on to the greater panorama of urban affairs in America.
Yeah, I think the thing to remember about New York is that in 1960, New York had 3.1 million private sector jobs. We have today about 2.4 million private sector jobs. The city has lost 700,000 private sector jobs over 35 years. No mayor can solve budget problems, can handle the problems of schools effectively, or any other problems until the private sector economy improves. The private sector economy can't improve until the burden of taxes and regulations are reduced. In order to do that, the city has to be willing to take risks. The great problem for Giuliani is that for many people in the city, and Jim has alluded to this, so many people are directly dependent on the city that slow economic decline for them is preferable to the transformation, the wrenching transformation that might be required to regenerate the city's economy.
Of course, you need to make the business climate better. But there's two caveats in the points that both Fred and Jim are making. One is that so far there's no real hard empirical evidence that reducing the size of government grows jobs. This is a theory right now that's being, a proponent of the conservative ideological movement, and has been adopted widespread across the country.
That's what I just said, right?
You didn't say that
Conservative mayors and governors run into this problem of thinking that it's going to rebound.
I'm saying that it's a theory, so that while Fred was saying is that
let's look at it scientifically. Could the obverse possibly be true, that the more government jobs you have, that creates more private jobs?
No, the point is that the information we have out there is very risky at best, because what we're doing is we're going to displace a lot of people from employment. And Fred says there's a lag time here. This lag time may be forever.
What about all these immigrants who come in and they get jobs in the private sector, they're doing very well. You've got the South American community, the Asian community, the Muslims, the Russian Jews. They're coming in, they don't know the language frequently, they don't have a lot of money. They are finding private sector jobs in this city. That's what as I understand it, that is what is keeping this city afloat.
The immigrant population, clearly and surely there are lots of immigrants who come and who create jobs in grocery stores and all-night Korean markets, etc. There are also a lot of immigrants who are also jobless, a lot of immigrants who are also on welfare. And and who are subsidized by government. And there are also a lot of jobs in the private sector that are subsidized by public subsidy, which I don't consider private jobs at all, but because a lot of private corporations exist on public largesse. Now, with the question of welfare and welfare reform, yeah, I think people want to work. With the fingerprinting, what we found, by the way, with the fingerprinting programs is you found, in terms of, after all of this rhetoric about inducing the work ethic, you found that a lot of people on welfare were, in fact, working, that they use welfare income or grants as a supplement to their income.
These are sort of the 100,000 that have been knocked off the rolls. I mean, and that happened
that's true.
in the Giuliani administration, right?
That's true. And you have to also remember there's a tremendous now income gap between those who are actually working and those who, in terms of working in the workforce. There's an income gap that's increasing, not narrowing. But you also have a large and increasing burgeoning homeless population and begging population, which the working class in New York in particular are annoyed with and paranoid about, because there is that perception of crime. Even though the city is safer, it is not yet safe.
Okay, I want to point to that picture of Abraham Lincoln, who gave the famous House Divided speech in this very hall in 1858, and here is an excerpt of what he said. "A house divided against itself cannot stand. I do not expect the house to fall, but I do expect it will cease to be divided. It will become all one thing or all the other." Now, if you apply that to the racial situation in New York in 1996, is it polarizing further? Is it coming together? Is it better? Is it worse?
I think we're living, to use that old phrase, we're living in the best of times and the worst of times. In many ways, the racial climate in the city has improved in the sense that we really feel that we have people who are attentive to the racial situation and who are not going to empower the demagogues. I think it's very important to either ignore the demagogues or not to empower them in ways that make their claims, their exaggerated claims, taken seriously, because their exaggerated claims should not be taken seriously. At the same time, you do have racial tensions, racial segregation. We have a very racially segregated neighborhoods in the city. We have racially segregated schools. We have public officials who don't even talk about integration anymore, much less enforce it. So I think that a house divided against itself, yeah, it cannot stand. And so we need, it seems to me, a clear and forceful leadership in the city on everybody's part to bring people together and to interact and to maintain the whole notion of a melting pot in America as opposed to a gorgeous mosaic.
Fred Siegel, would you, just to close out this segment, would your colleagues at this progressive Cooper Union Institute for the Advancement of
Arts and Sciences,
would they agree with what Michael Meyers just said? Getting back to this whole idea of our intellectuals behind the curve, or are they with it?
Most academics no longer think in that plane. Much of academia has dissolved into specialties, subspecialties, and all forms of irrational cant. And much of academia practices witchcraft instead of studying it. And it's just not a question, it's not a question that comes up. I mean, which sounds like an odd thing to say. I think the interesting thing, go back to your point, Ben, about immigrants, the most interesting new part of the immigrant mix in New York is African immigrants. And they're doing very well. New immigrants from Africa who are doing very well, whose per capita income now is exceeding that of native-born African Americans.
Yeah.
They potentially can serve as a kind of vanguard to bridge some of the differences in the city over time.
If there's one thing I think we have learned, and I agree with what Michael said about the continuing segregation or division, it's visible, it's undeniable. What we've learned is that rainbow coalition politics, such as it was practiced in the 80s, was not the solution to that. It intensified it. If you're talking about segregating voting districts, as people still are trying to do, if you're talking about defining people first and foremost by skin color in terms of a presumed group membership in school, curriculum design, and other things, you're only digging the trench deeper. It's understandable why people retreat into that, but the one thing I think we've learned in this city is that was really headed nowhere.
Okay. Thank you, Fred Siegel, Esther Fuchs, Michael Meyers, and Jim Sleeper. Join us next week for a continuation of this discussion about American cities. We enjoy hearing from our viewers. Please send your comments and questions to New River Media, 1150 17th Street Northwest, Washington, D.C. 20036. We can also be reached via email at thinktv@aol.com or on the World Wide Web at www.thinktank.com. For Think Tank, I'm Ben Wattenberg.
This has been a production of BJW Incorporated in association with New River Media, which are solely responsible for its content.